Hello there. It's almost Valentine's Day once again, and I hope you're doing very well. Here's a little program about attraction and some of the things I think are important for sustaining long-term and loving, healthy relationships. So it's a time for reflecting and looking forwards. And I think the focus can often be on, well, who's going to be my next person and how is it going to be? But more importantly, I think it's good to reflect on what's gone wrong in the past and of course look at what's right as well and what's going to work in the future. So traditionally relationships were much more focused on sustainability and good character, and the social institutions that supported that were religious and it's like based on shame and stuff like that, because it was important when times were hard that people stayed together for the interests of the children. But as our culture has evolved and become more abundant in material terms, we've been able to free up relationships and they've become much more based on merit. And this means that the weaknesses in our relationships are much more exposed to critical judgment and allowing them to be sort of processed and seen and acted upon. So, our parents may have put up with all sorts of awful behaviour for the sake of staying together, which is a very traditional thing. But now the tendency is, when things are too bad, to break up and look for somebody better. Or, of course, just to be single, which is also a growing phenomena. So first of all, I'd like to look at attraction. And because of this change in the relationship dynamic, it's very substantial towards a meritocratic side. We've moved from a focus on good character, which is what actually sustains high quality relationships, to a focus on appearances and quite shallow attractional things. Now these are important, I don't want to dismiss them because they come from a very authentic biological place, and in particular for women, the desire to find an attractive mate and produce good looking offspring has been a biological drive for a long time, and that's been somewhat suppressed in the traditional relationships. But physical attraction is impersonal. We largely inherit our good looks from our parents and generations going back as a result of prior periods of female selection and mate choices. So when somebody compliments you, they're really saying they appreciate your parents' decision more than something about you. And that's although very authentic, is kind of impersonal. So there's a way of turning that around, because we do have a choice in how we appear physically. We can eat healthily, we can exercise, and we can make the most of what we've inherited, and that shows good character. And so the way to work with people, I suggest, around this is to congratulate people on looking after themselves and so forth. So what to do? Well, of course, stay fit, eat a healthy plant-based diet with lots of fresh fruit and vegetables so that you are healthy and vibrant, and also do the best you can with your personal care, so that you're clean and well presented. The next kind of attractional force is material attraction. This is the attraction to a person's social status or standing, the preference for the lead singer rather than the bass player, all of those kind of things. And again, this is kind of biological. It's about being good providers. This is more a thing for men as well. So women tend to be attracted to more accomplished men. And there is and that makes it personal. That makes it about the quality of the character of the person. Are they taking care of their business? Are they focused on their goals? And so on and so forth. And of course, they're very different perspectives on what makes a person successful, and there are objective uh, elements to this, but of course it can be very subjective. Some people are attracted to actually things that are quite dysfunctional and unhealthy, so that's something to look at. And material success is also fragile. It's something that passes away. It's impermanent potentially. You could have a financial disaster, a bad business decision. You could lose a lot of money, gambling, and so on and so forth. Physical attraction's a little bit more permanent because we all age. But we do generally tend to look for more successful people. And on the whole, you don't want to be dating the guy that's begging on the street corner and so on and so forth. So again, this is important biological stuff, just like physical attraction. It's very authentic, but it's impersonal. But we can turn it around and make this into an intimate and personal thing by congratulating people on their success and their work and showing appreciation for their accomplishments. And it's also important to be doing what you want to do, and if you're not, at least making the best of your situation, and to be out there as well. To be showing up for people and showing what it is that you do, and ideally being happy with it, because that shows too. The final dynamic of attraction I'd like to talk about is emotional attraction, and this is a minefield because of all the bad messages we tend to pick up from previous generations, and they're just generally bad information that's out there. Emotional attraction is the most personal and strongest form of attraction, and it can be either healthy or unhealthy, or if you prefer, functional and dysfunctional. And emotional attraction is either authentic or inauthentic. So when it's based on old messages and old patterns, it's inauthentic. It's us repeating some behavior that we've learned before, rather than it actually being about genuinely who the other person is in the relationship. And our emotional attraction is strongly influenced by romantic notions, and this is quite a Western phenomena, which is only a few centuries old, and is a kind of displaced religious experience. And I've got some other programs about this, which you'll find on my channel. And it's all about the other person being the one, which is kind of a clue as to the original spiritual nature and religious context of romantic love. And the feelings we get when we're in this state of romantic love can be very, very powerful emotions, and they're not particularly healthy at all or productive to forming good relationships. So it's worth always trying to stay a step away from that stuff and look onto it from the perspective of an objective observer, and in particular to process this material before body fluids get involved and things get a bit more intimate physically, because that can be another thing that blocks us from being realistic about the situation. And what we do when we fall in love is we tend to fall in love with our fantasy of what the other person is and what the situation represents, rather than it being a real experience. It's a form of delusion. And invariably we tend to pedestal the other, the target of our attraction, and not see their faults and weaknesses, which is a very real problem. If we dig further into this dynamic of emotional attraction, there's a way of perhaps simplifying it into polarities, a bit like magnets. You know how the opposite polarities of magnets attract. So north attracts south, south attracts north, whereas the alike ends of the magnetic polarity don't tend to attract. So basically people on this sort of polarity are either givers or takers. And the givers, if you like, would be called codependents, and the takers would be called narcissists. And we have a phrase, at least here in the UK, for codependents. We tend to call them doormats. The doormats of the relationship. They're people that allow themselves to get walked over because they have a low self-esteem. So it's very important to develop your self-esteem before you get into romantic relationships. Now, the interesting thing about relationships can be very strong and very unhealthy as well. So if you have very strong, extreme polarities of very codependent and very narcissistic, so big giver, big taker, these people can form lifelong relationships, and you see this quite a lot in the older generation. They just stick together through thick and through thin, and it's painful to watch because the people aren't getting any healing. And in general, narcissists cannot be healed, so the sort of taker in the relationship doesn't tend to recover, even with therapy or anything like that. They might get easier to deal with as they age. They might be a bit more mellow. But it's the givers who tend to heal, particularly if they seek relational support from counsellors and so forth. And what they do is develop more functional ways of relating, and you can build up your self-esteem through that kind of work. And we also have this dynamic of being attracted to bad boys and bad girls, which is again toxic and inauthentic, because it's all about messages and not about being really present with who the other person is. So stable relationships will tend to withstand the challenges of daily life, whereas the inauthentic relationships will be unstable and tend to fracture. And it's also worth noting that some people are just too self-centered or narcissistic to maintain relationships with anyone other than the sort of the doormat type of person. And in general, people will tend to develop self-esteem as long as they're not too insular and they see other people. And again, this can create strains on relationships where one person is evolving, whereas the other person is stuck. And emotionally unwell people can be very attractive to us when we are in this sort of inauthentic messages, stuff from our past. It's possible, of course, to work more positively and speedily on developing self-esteem if you do sort of like a regular daily practice. And there's a book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, which is well worth having a look at, and what's in there. Particularly, I think positive affirmations are a nice simple practice, and looking more deeply at how we behave and what we're doing with these daily practices can be really helpful. How do we step away from these inauthentic emotional attractions to people? Well, the answer really is to form some objective values and look for those in people before we consider too much the physical attraction and the other forces of attraction. And really, there are 3 elements to sustaining healthy relationships, and they are love, care, and respect. And if we define love as a sort of spontaneous attraction to the virtuous character we see in people, so I'm talking about things like honesty, people who are principled and courageous. By courageous, I mean able to compromise and take sacrifices. We're talking about people that are loyal, that are curious, that are empathic and kind, but also who are humble and express sense and sensibility. So those are all sort of positive character traits of virtuous people, and it's on the basis of those qualities that we can build a really sort of deep and loving connection with people that is really about seeing who people are and about sort of celebrating good quality and the sort of gold that there is in being human. So when we put superficial attraction before love, which is, as I just explained, all about character and good virtuous character, what we get is we get shallow relationships, and these again are not sustainable, because I explained these powers of attraction tend to be impermanent, whereas good character tends to be a bit deeper. And that's not to say that people can't initially demonstrate some good character and then change later and reveal themselves actually to be not so good. And people really do change as well through life's experiences, perhaps a death of someone close, or some other kind of stress or strain, financial or whatever, may cause an existential crisis. And through those, people can sort of turn to become worse, but good people will tend to turn and become better in those scenarios. So people do change, and that's quite a worrying thing that I find in relationships. You never really know what you're going to get in the long term, but there's definitely things you can look for, and there's signs, and there's red flags, and there's stuff that will give you clues about how somebody will turn up when the going gets tough. So yes, love is about good character, and you may have heard of the 5 languages of love. So to me, the most important one is actual verbal appreciation, because that really shows that you are seeing the other for who they are, which is very intimate. So that really works for me, and I think is the highest goal in the sort of 5 languages of love, to develop that kind of verbal discourse, because of the greater intimacy that's there. And I think it was Gary Chapman came up with these 5 languages of love. So there's gifting, there's quality time together, there's words of affirmation, which is the one I put at the top of the list. There's also acts of service or devotion, and there's physical touch, which I'm going to move on to. So we've spoken about love. The next one on the list is care. So we have love, care, and respect. Care is in there, as I just said. It's one of the 5 languages of love. I consider this to sort of be a primate thing. We're social creatures, and we need to turn up in little ways. And this is a quote. Jung once said that feeling is a matter of the small, and in human love we can see that it is true. The real relatedness between 2 people is experienced in the small tasks they do together. The quiet conversation when the day's upheavals are at rest, the soft word of understanding, the daily companionship, the encouragement offered in a difficult moment, the small gift when least expected, and the spontaneous gesture of love. And that's a quotation from Robert Johnson, and I'll put all the links and sources underneath. So these little things, these little habits in daily life are really very important for sustaining the feeling of togetherness. There's something also, I think, biological about this stuff. Like I say, we're these primates, and we need affection, and we need regular touch and regular encouragement. So finally, we come on to what I view as the Achilles heel of relationships, the one thing that tends to break them more than other things. Now, if somebody is genuinely of a good character, then loving them is quite easy. And so long as you're loving somebody, it's generally easy also to care for them. Although some people have had childhoods where they haven't been received enough affection, and they may have that as a habit or part of their personality, that they don't generally aren't in the habit of being nice to somebody else, but they're not used to it. So they can find that caring for their others in their life can be a challenge. They might be a bit more solitary. But these are all things that can be worked on and overcome, and particularly if you're in a relationship with somebody that's really lovable, it's a lot easier. So respect is the Achilles heel, and we don't deserve respect. That seems to be a bit of a sort of a common cultural belief. Respect is earned through respectable behaviour, and it's all about treating others as you would wish to be treated, which is kind of sounds familiar. It's an old, almost a parable, I suppose. If we put our interests above those of our partners, this will kill the relationship very quickly. And essentially, it's about talking to others as you would like to be spoken to. And disrespect can be either sort of active in terms of forms of abuse, verbal abuse, sarcasm, and obviously all manner of domestic violence. But disrespect can also be passive in the form of neglect, and so not loving, not caring for, and not giving consideration to the other. And it's reasonable to expect in a long-term relationship that there will be some triggering, and that there will be occasional painful outbursts from people. None of us is perfect, of course, and most of us have some kind of childhood trauma, or have had some kind of trauma in our past that gets brought up in relationships. And you know, if it's only, say, once or twice every 4 or 5 years, then we can understand that it's nothing personal, and hopefully we can support each other and move through that stuff. But repeat performances of abuse and neglect in relationships show you that there's some deeper problem there, and essentially this is disrespectful. If you're not handling your stuff, if you're not containing and not working very actively on these kind of triggers, if they're coming up regularly, you're showing a disrespect for yourself and for your partner. And really, in those situations, relationships can be very hard and more bother than we want to engage in. And it really shows you, when that's going on, that there's a lack of some of those qualities that I spoke about that cause love to happen, those positive qualities of courage and integrity, and so on and so forth, the good values. And what can happen with people with difficult feelings like this that are triggered is they tend to contain their emotional trauma and cope with it in negative ways through intoxicants. And that's a coping strategy, and that can help to keep people in a state where they can actually deal with others without triggering and it going into some really seriously bad behavior. But what that does is it blocks us from our healing. So we need a space to take our pain and our trauma and, you know, open it up and dig into it and have the feelings that were suppressed or not allowed. So that's a very important part of sustaining relationships, having that space outside of the relationship to support and grow you as a spiritual and evolving person. Emotional neglectful behavior towards those around us will tend to come across as self-centered and disrespectful if it's too continuous and ongoing. And I mean, I find it a challenge myself to treat the interests of others as equal to my own. We all have a propensity towards being selfish. It's a natural survival instinct, but it's also antisocial. And as we grow and mature, we hopefully move towards being more objective and understanding, but really we're all equally valuable in the big scheme of life. We don't, you know, no special people, and you know, really I or you are not more important in any objective sense than anyone else. So this is kind of philosophical stuff, and again, that's to get into this stuff of growth is about stepping back and stepping away from emotions and into sort of the rational mind and considering stuff in a more contemplative way. So just to wind up, this age of meritorious relationships is a battlefield for personal growth. So be kind to yourself and take it easy. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this valuable, and I'll post the resources underneath. And I really do welcome feedback and comments. So if you've got anything to contribute or anything you'd like to ask, that would be very, very welcome. Bye for now.